Hello and welcome to today's Poison Center Notifications webinar. My name is Heidi Rasikari, and together with my colleagues from the Poison Center team, we are going to present some best practices from start to market. In today's agenda, we'll look at three main presentations. First, we'll look at best practices for dossier preparation. In the second presentation, we'll look at tips for some of the most commonly failed validation rules. And then in the third and final presentation, we'll look at the guidelines for using the portal. I will make a few concluding remarks, but the webinar will remain open for questions until 1 o'clock Helsinki time. Today, you can expect from us, if you are a new user, on how to avoid and overcome common issues or misunderstandings during the PCN process. If you are a more accustomed user to the PCN process, we'll help you identify areas in your notification to improve the quality. Of course, if you would like to ask a question, you can do so at any time at slido.com with the event code on the screen. You can send your questions from 11 to 1 o'clock, but we will send replies only until 2 o'clock. Of course, we prefer that you only submit questions that are within the scope of today's presentation. And if we are unable to answer your question, please do contact us at the contact form. And of course, today's material will all be available, so the video recording, the presentations, and the Q&A. And this will be available from the ECHO website under the webinars section. Of course, the webinar will indeed also be made available on our Poison Center playlist in YouTube, where we hold all of our recorded material, such as the animations, tutorials, and other video demonstrations. And just for information, I would like to point out that YouTube has an auto-translate functionality where you can select subtitles in the language of your choice. So let's begin with the very first presentation, Best Practices for Dossier Preparation. So we're at the end of March. The first compliance date has now passed. And you can see in the very first image here at the top that the peak total number of submissions was recorded in December, totaling almost 400,000 submissions. Now, these submissions included initial submissions, update submissions, and also failed submissions as well. In the second image on the screen, you can see also that Germany, Italy, and France were the main member states where these submissions were sent to. I'd also like to point out that we observed around about a 13% failure rate in these submissions. And this was quite evident in some of our support efforts, in particular with our help desk support and of course our LinkedIn support channels, where we received many hundreds of questions about some of the mistakes and ways to overcome some of the difficulties faced by notifiers. Of course, we're still receiving quite many questions at the moment, but in general, we are of reoccurring concerns and mistakes. And it is these mistakes and concerns, or these incidents, that actually form the basis of this presentation and this whole webinar, where in particular, I would like to point out where updates should be considered, where best practice should be employed, and where and how mistakes can be avoided. I would also like to point out some important areas about keeping information up to date. Of course, information in the notification should always be up to date, although the legal text does point out in certain scenarios where a notification update is required before placing that mixture as changed on the market. So this could be a change in a product identifier or classification, or even new data in the toxicological section, or of course significant changes in the composition. But of course, notifying any change in the existing information or including new or additional information is also important for the work of poison centres. In these next slides, I would like to show you ways in which you might like to consider updates to include information that is not systematically checked by the validation assistant. So it could be in cases where the information is required in the legal text. It could also be when mistakes have been made. And also to improve the quality of the notification. I think the main thing I would like to point out here on this slide is that the appointed bodies have the right to ask for further clarification and can always request an update. Coming to the topic of updates, there are many ways that you can, or many different types of updates that you can make. But when you do make an update for a notification, you always have to provide a reason or a justification. And for this, there is a specific pick list. Now, there is not that many selections to be made from the pick list. 3 of them are already listed in the legal text. And then there's 3 here that I would like to point out. There's some new ones that we have added. So the first one is the correction of error. And this is really to be used only when you have previously and knowingly entered invalid information, for example, the wrong telephone number for an emergency contact. The second one is the correction or deletion of trade name, and this is a very specific correction of error for when you've misspelled or entered the wrong trade name in the notification. And the third one here is the expansion of market area. Now, this is a valid reason to update a notification, but you will receive a warning in the validation assistant. And this warning does not indicate that you've done something wrong. Rather, it's more of informing the appointed bodies who will be receiving this update notification as a new initial submission for them. Now, of course, when you do select a reason for updating, quite often it should be accompanied with some remarks. And these remarks are a free text field. And these can be used to provide further explanation. And for instance, this is very important if you have selected a correction of error. And this is where you would need to provide information about that error to the appointed bodies. Of course, it's also possible that you can add more than one reason for updating a notification. And for this, you can select the new item button to add multiple justifications. And finally, I would like to also point out that there are other reasons that aren't listed in the pick list, and you would need to include these update reasons as free text. For example, a new packaging type. So in this first part of my presentation, I would like to look at some of the free text considerations and how these can enhance the quality of a notification. So when we talk about free text, we usually imply that there is some language requirements behind it as well. And you are more than likely aware that the free text fields are generated for languages that are indicated in the dossier header. Now, currently, the validation assistant will only check information or free text information for the toxicological information section, and what it is checking is that information has been provided in each language specified as per the header. Of course, and rightfully so, there are other free text fields that are not checked by the validation assistant, and this includes the additional text and the remarks fields. One thing I would like to really point out here is that you shouldn't really skip free text fields if they provide relevant information. And if you do need to add free text, you should do it for all of the indicated languages. So let's look at a few examples. Firstly, I'd like to point out There are cases when the free text is not mandatory to provide at all. And a clear example here is in the labeling section. Indeed, we acknowledge that the legal text does state that only the hazard and precautionary statement codes should be provided. But, of course, the system does generate a number of additional text fields, and this allows you, as a notifier, to complete those statements with free text and enhance the quality. One example here I have is where you might want to indicate the specific organs that are affected. Another example here is when the additional text can be used to include mandatory information that is to be provided in terms of the obligatory supplemental labeling information under Article 25 of the CLP regulation. So an example here would be the additional text could be used to include certain safety phrases for plant protection products as it is required on the label. Another example, also coming from the labeling section, is the additional labeling requirements. Now, this section is available to indicate hazard statements that are applied under different legislations. Of course, an additional text field is generated and it is used to complete those statements for the obligatory supplemental labeling information. And a clear example here is for the EUH 208 phrase, where you would indicate the name of the sensitizing substance. A final example here is the substance and reference substance name. Now, indeed, this is free text field, but it is not language specific. Of course, the language choice of these names is at the discretion of the notifier, but it should be considered what are the language requirements of the recipient, or in the case of multiple recipients. Indeed, if you wanted to include multiple languages of the names of the substance, this can be done in the reference substance section under the field synonyms. The next part of my presentation looks at those mistakes that we feel can be prevented. So firstly, just a quick run by over the tools to help avoid or even spot potential mistakes. So firstly, and most obviously, is to run the validation assistant. This can be done at any time, and at the very latest should be done after you create the dossier. Of course, once you create the dossier, you can always use the PCN preview report as well, as this contains all of the information that you've entered into the notification, and it allows you to easily look through the information that you've provided. It may help to spot mistakes. And finally here, I would like to point out that you should also check the validation report in the ECHA submission portal once you have made a submission, because there are additional checks that are run in the portal. And these quite often may trigger some quality rules that you should be aware of. So what are the areas that I think you should double check, some important areas? And I would have to say that indeed the correct UFI is one of them. You should double check that you are using the correct UFI in the notification, the one that is assigned to the correct mixture composition. Secondly, the validity of the UFI. Of course, the system will not accept an invalid UFI, and that's not so much a problem, as you can check it and include the correct UFI. However, it is a problem if that invalid UFI is on the label. In case of any doubt, we also recommend you to use the validate UFI function, which is available in the UFI generator tool. I think the third main area where special attention should be paid to is the mixture composition or the components of the composition. So in particular, the concentration, also the correct identifiers are used, and the specific flags. If you're using a standard formula or an ICG or a GCI. Now I'm coming back here to the correction of error update reason, and this is a solution only for when, as I mentioned before, when an error has been made in an entry. So you would indeed make the selection update for a correction of error. And as I mentioned before, it's important to provide the explanation of the error in the remarks field. Now, of course, this should be included in every relevant language. Now, this solution to fix certain errors or to make appointed bodies aware of certain errors is not possible to use in all scenarios. And one of these scenarios would be a change, or if you made an error in the concentration outside of the allowed limits. If you wanted to fix one of those errors in a concentration, it would be blocked by the system. Now, we do have an IT solution coming which can help with these sorts of unfortunate errors, and you'll hear more about that in the third presentation. So the first example here I would like to share is correcting the wrong UFI. Now, again, you would make the selection for the update as a correction of error. You would add the remarks and include it in all the languages. And then in the notification itself, you would add the correct UFI. At this point in time, you would also need to leave the incorrect UFI in the notification, because if you removed it, it would trigger a business rule failure. So you would need to have both UFIs, the correct and the incorrect one, in the notification, but you would include in the remarks section more information about the situation. So here, just stressing again, practice good management with the UFI. Make sure you are using the correct VAT number. Also, if you are retyping the UFI into the dossier preparation tools, again, check that you have the correct UFI. Another example I would like to share is this incorrect use of standard formulas. Now, if you recall from October last year, and the amended Annex 8 introduced two new component identifier types, the standard formula components and the interchangeable components. And these are only to be used where specific criteria are met. Now, standard formulas in particular are used to identify specific construction products and currently fuels that are listed in Annex 8. So it's not to be used if these type of mixtures are not relevant for your notification. If a notification has been made incorrectly using the standard formula tick box, then it would be expected and recommended to update for a correction of error and deselecting that tick box. So a few slides now on the best practice for mixtures in mixtures. And just as a refresher, the main mixture composition is made up of substance components and mixture components, which we call MIMs or mixture in mixtures. Now, a data set for each substance needs to be first created, and then it needs to be linked to a reference substance. Similarly, a data set for each MIM also needs to be created, and it will consist of substances, each linked to a reference substance. Now, the problem here is how to identify the components, or which level to identify the components correctly. And this is particularly important for mixture in mixture components. But firstly, if you know the full composition of the MIM, then it's not really a MIM anymore. You can add these substance components at the main mixture level. So under the main mixture composition, you would indicate as substances. But if you don't know the full MIM composition, then you would add a MIM component to the main mixture composition, and then you would identify this MIM with its name, and also you would either include information about the UFI and the known substances and or the supplier details. Now, in many cases, the final mixture that is notified is comprised of 100% mixture in mixture. Now, often this is the case when the notifier doesn't have access to all of the compositional information, and a classic example here is for the repackager. Now, as just mentioned, the mixture composition can of course be identified using a UFI, provided it has already been notified by the supplier. And we're often asked, how can I notify my UFI? Well, there's no procedure for notifying a UFI. You must make a full notification according to the harmonized format. So this means that you would need to indicate your own submitter details. You would need to indicate information about the mixture, the classification, the labeling, the toxicological information. You would also need to indicate your own UFI, plus information on the products. Now, the supplier's UFI forms only a small part of the full notification. It's a very important part. And this is indicated in the MIM UFI section in the mixture composition document. But if you are identifying a MIM component and you are using the supplier's contact details to assist with this, then you should ensure that you use EU supplier details. Now, this is primarily to assist the authorities in case they need to further follow up on any composition inquiries they may have. I'd also like to point out here that if you are an EU importer of a mixture that you are going to use to reformulate into your own final product, that you also need to notify your own final product as well as the imported mixture that you use. So one of my last slides here is just looking at some very simple ways to avoid mistakes with the MIM UFI, and that's by practicing good communication in the supply chain. So for example, a supplier should always inform their customer if a UFI has been notified. And they should also inform through which system that UFI or that notification has been made. So was the UFI submitted via the ECHA submission portal and it consists in the database, or has it gone through the national systems? The supplier should also inform the customer on which markets that UFI is available to the appointed bodies. Now, if the customer notifies a mixture in mixture UFI that is not in the database, they will receive a warning. Now, they then need to go and investigate whether this is a legitimate warning or if they need to actually update their notification with additional information. Similarly, the customer should also inform their upstream industrial mixture supplier, let's say, if the MIM that they use will have a consumer or professional use. Because if the upstream supplier only indicates industrial use, this will trigger a failure for the customer during his notification process. So to overcome this, the supplier could update the notification to include the other use types for professional and consumer use. So a few final considerations from me about this presentation is to avoid mistakes and don't rush. Okay, we have made available tools and support, and you can find these from our Poison Center website. But if you have any doubt or you need help with an issue, please do contact ECHA for advice. We're only too happy to help. And finally, remember the importance of the information you provide and keep your notification up to date. Thanks for your attention.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar also from my side. My name is Daniele Ape, and I'm part of the ECHA Poison Center team. I will focus this part of the webinar on the concept of validation rule, and I will try to clarify it a bit and to provide some hint also by means of example on how to deal with it, why we have these rules in place, and how to overcome some of the possible most common issues. So first of all, validation rule, what they are checks basically. They are automatic checks which have been discussed and agreed with all our stakeholders, including authorities and industry. And the main objective is twofold. So to make sure that the information submitted meets the legal requirements, so the dossier is in line with Annex 8, but also to support the submitter in improving the quality of the dossier. And actually, this is useful also for the receiver, for the user of this information, so authorities, Poison Center, and appointed bodies, because the information which reach them is of a high quality and is in accordance with the legal requirement. Now, we have two main kind of validation rules. We have the so-called business rule, and these are rules that fail your dossier if the information is a specific information is not provided. This is because the information is required by the legal text. Then we have the so-called quality rule, and this rule they trigger a warning only if a certain information is not provided or if it's not provided according to the rule. And we will come back on this important distinction later. Another important aspect is to know that the validation rule, both business rule and quality rule, they work on two different levels. So we have the IUCLID rules, and the IUCLID rules are rules that can be checked in your dossier before you submit the notification. The other kind of rules are porter rules, or so-called also contextual rules. And these are rules, are checks that work upon submission. So you have these two levels. Before you submit, certain rule can be triggered, and then upon submission. And I will come back to this distinction again later. So I want to give you already the first tip, which is run the validation assistant. So check the rules before you submit. The IUCLID validation rule, so the rule which they can work before you submit the dossier, can be checked by running the validation assistant, which is a functionality which is present in the portal. The portal rules or contextual rules cannot be checked in advance, but the portal will include all the rules that can be checked before, plus additional rules, which I will explain later. So please use the validation assistant before you submit your dossier. As an example about these two, how this rule works on two different levels, are, for example, information that has to be provided. For instance, the toxicological information. So if you don't provide the toxicological information, which is legally required for each notification, and you run the validation assistant, you will get this error message. So it means that you have to provide this information before submitting. At the same time, if you provide certain specific information, you may get a warning message. Like, for instance, we have a rule checking the information provided for the substance identification. These are rules that cannot, the information provided depends on the specific case. But this rule, for example, check that if certain information, certain specific strings are included in the dossier, then you have a warning, a quality rule, a warning telling you the certain information may need to be revised. Once you submit the dossier, then the additional contextual rules come into place. So for instance, if you submit twice the same dossier, upon submitting the second dossier, you will get an error message, the failure, because you cannot submit twice the same dossier. And still, again, the portal contains some quality rules that they check the information that you have provided against information which is already present in the database. For instance, the UFI identification. So if you use the UFI to identify your meme, then the portal will check if this UFI is present. If it is not present, a warning message will be triggered. The second tip, which it's very important, even if it may sound obvious, is to use the latest version of Euclid. So if you're working in the cloud, then the Euclid cloud is automatically updated to the latest version. While if you are using Euclid standalone, then the latest version is the one that you should download and use. At the moment, the latest version is the one we released in October last year. Now, an important piece of information you may have heard already is that the classical interface will be decommissioned soon. So if you are using an old version of Euclid, you may still be using the classical interface, which does not include the language-specific field. And this is because it will be decommissioned. So please use the user interface. Now, a third tip is to check the your dossier may have, once you validate it and you submit it, it may have 3 different outcomes. A failed submission is a submission which did not reach the final user, so it did not reach the appointed body and the Poisson Center. So it needs to be resubmitted after checking the errors, fixing the errors. While a dossier can be successfully submitted, but yet with warning, and you will get this information from the submission report. This means that certain warning will be triggered, and this may need to be checked, as I will explain soon. Finally, if there are no warning and no business rule and no failures, your dossier gets successfully submitted, and this means there are no rule at all have been triggered. Now let's try to go through some of the most common issues that we have, that our stakeholders, the submitters, encounter. One of the issues is an inexplicable update failure. What it means that I have submitted an initial dossier, I got some error messages, I try to fix them and submit an update, and now my update fails again. And you get normally a message telling you that an existing PCN number should be used in updates notified by the same legal entity. So what happens here? What happened is that your initial notification failed. So your initial notification did not reach the appointed body. It is not in the portal, in the database. So when you try to submit an update, there's no PCN number linked to this. So when your first notification fails, you should not submit an update, but rather fix the error and submit a new notification. Only when a new initial successful notification is submitted, then you can submit updates when this is needed. Another problem that some of the stakeholders encounter is the missing dossier header. So this is a bit more technical issue. When you receive this error message that the dossier header is missing, you may wonder, what is this dossier header? The dossier header is basically a kind of, we can consider it as a main page of the dossier. It sets the framework of your dossier. So it includes some administrative information, such as the PCN number or the type of information, the type of the notification that you are submitting. For instance, whether it is an initial or an update. So if you have worked in the cloud, you should not encounter this problem. But if you have created your dossier outside the cloud in your own system, you may have not included or created this header. And this can be easily added by selecting Create Dossier from the top right corner when you finish your mixture dataset. Now, a common issue is we want to clarify is the difference between warning and failure. So a submission with warning. When you get a warning message, so something that telling you that the information may be provided differently or may be provided when you have not provided, this does not mean that you necessarily need to take action. So warnings are linked, as I explained earlier, are linked to quality rules. So they do not prevent successful submission. So notifications that are successful with warning are dispatched to the relevant appointed body. These rules, which have been agreed between industry and appointed body, they want to warn you that in certain situations, this information may be wrong or may need to be revised, but not always. So it's up to you, and you may have all the reasons to submit the information as you are doing. Another common issue is an issue with inexplicable failure. What it means that the validation assistant may show no error when you try to run it before the submission. And then when you submit the dossier, you get an error and the dossier does not go through. What happens? You may wonder whether there is a problem with your validation assistant. In reality, there's no problem. Most of the time, the problem is that the information the failures are triggered by the portal. So the Euclid validation assistant checks the information in the single dossier before you submit it. Following the submission to the portal, the information, as I explained earlier, is checked against information which was previously submitted by the same notifier or even by other legal entities. So if the system encounter inconsistency, like for instance what we explained before, there is no initial submission, so you cannot submit an update. So at that point you can get error upon submission. So again, please, you always use the latest version of Euclid, or if you use the cloud, then you don't encounter the problem because the validation assistant is updated. A last common issue that we want to present is the apparent missing information, ghost information that we are sure that you have provided, but still you receive an error message because this information is not provided. What could be wrong in this case? We take the toxicological information field as an example, but in practice, this can be true also for other free text field. So the toxicological information and other free text field, they must be provided in each relevant language. So that means that if you have selected more than one language in your dossier header because you are submitting this dossier to multiple countries, then this free text field has to be filled in for all different languages and not only once. So the example here, you can see the example of the toxicological information. If you intended to submit the dossier to a country accepting English language and to a country like Germany accepting or requesting German language, then the system will show you two fields in the toxicological information section, and you are supposed to fill them in both in the relevant language. Now, how can you fix easily error? The validation assistant report will show you a list of rules, both quality rules or business rules in two different tabs. Most of these rules, not all of them unfortunately at the moment, they will provide you a direct link to the place in the dossier, the record in the dossier, which needs to be fixed. In particular, for instance, in this screenshot, you can see an error triggered because of a problem in the composition. And then you will have the number of the component which needs to be checked. And the same happens for many other rules, that they will provide a link directly to the record which needs to be looked at and fixed. Now we'll conclude this session by reminding you that changes to the business rule are always possible. We keep discussing and analyzing the existing business rule and the need for new business rule with our stakeholders. There can be a need because of changing the legal text. Now that the legal text is a bit more stable, we are more working on new feature or fixing or adding new business rule. So in April in particular, we will introduce an important changes which regard the justification when PH is not available, which is a legal requirement following the latest amendment of the legal text. This rule was originally implemented as a warning to support industry in the transition with the new, from the old format to the new format. Now in April, as agreed originally with the stakeholders, will be turned into failure. So if the PH is not available, a justification has to be provided. Then we will introduce a set of rules checking the selection of the required language. This because each member state has a one or sometimes more than one language accepted, but one of these has to be selected. So we are based this rule on the overview table of the member state decision, which is published on our website. So if you select a certain specific country, then you have to make sure that the required language is selected. And finally, another important change to align our system with the legal text is the possibility to use the same generic component identifier multiple times in the same submission. And that's all from my side. So thank you very much for following it, and enjoy the rest of the webinar.
Hi, I'm Claudia Rimondo, and I work in the Poison Centers team. The aim of my presentation is to share with you some suggestions about how to use the ECHA submission portal and how to keep track of your submitted dossiers. The first suggestion refers to the right choice of the submission environment. When you access the ECHA Cloud services, you can spot a section dedicated to the submission services. On the right-hand side, you have the access to the ECHA submission portal production version. And this is the version of the submission portal which reflects the online tool that you need to use to submit your Poison Center notifications and make them available to appointed bodies. On the right-hand side, you have the access to the ECHA submission portal trial version. In here, you can get familiar with the features of the portal. You can test how a dummy submission can take place. But all the data that you submit in the trial version are treated as test data. They are not real data. They are not dispatched to appointed bodies. Now, both versions of the submission portal reflect the same functionalities, which means that you can upload and submit your dossiers. You can search among the dossiers you have submitted by using certain search criteria. You can also access the submission report and the validation report of the dossiers that you have submitted. Also, when you submit a PCN notification, both portals run the same type of validation rules. However, there are also main differences between these two versions of the ECHA submission portal, and it is important that you keep them in mind once you decide what is the purpose of your submission. When it comes to describing the differences between the ECHA submission portal production version and the ECHA submission portal trial version, the first big difference is that the dossiers that are submitted in the production version are dispatched to appointed bodies, while those that are submitted in the trial version remains in the portal. They don't get forwarded to any other third party, any other authority. Another difference is the URL. The ECHA submission portal trial version has a URL that starts with test env, which means test environment. The logo also is different. The logo of the ECA Submission Portal trial version has this little trial word in orange next to the cloud. And orange is also the predominant color of the layout of the ECA Submission Portal trial version, where all the buttons and the links are orange, while in the production version, the buttons and the links are blue. In the trial version, you always have a disclaimer in orange again, which is placed at the top part of the screen, and it follows you on every single page of the portal, and it reminds you that you are in the ECA Submission Portal trial version, that everything you will submit in this environment will be treated as test data. Once you have submitted a dossier, the system automatically assigns your submission a submission number, which is unique for each submission that you make. And you can use this submission number to retrieve that same dossier or to search for this dossier among the number of dossiers that you have already submitted. Moreover, for that dossier, you will have the possibility to access a submission report, where information, a summary of the information related to the submission is displayed. The ECA Submission Portal does not send any other kind of notification to the submitter after the dossier has been submitted. After your dossier has been submitted, you can check in the submission report what is going on with the submission. There is a specific section in the submission report that is called submission events. In here, you can keep track of all the events related to your submission. When the member state, one of the member states that you have indicated as recipient of your submission, receives your dossier, then in this section of the submission report, you will see a submission event that reads like dossier received by, and then the country code of the member state. As I said, this submission event appears once the dossier has received member state where the appointed body is. Appointed bodies have two options to receive dossiers. One option is via the e-delivery service, and the second option is via the Poison Centers database. Now, according to the choice made by the appointed body, the time the dossier received event becomes available in the submission report can slightly change. In general, the submission event gets displayed a few minutes after the submission has taken place. However, if you see that it takes longer, please contact ECA so that we can further investigate. In order for you to know when the appointed body considers your notification as accepted and therefore you can place the product on the market, you need to check the document available on the Poison Center website named Overview of Member State Decisions in relation to implementation of Annex 8 to CLP. Here we gather the information made available by appointed bodies in relation to the acceptance criteria to accept PCN notifications. In particular, looking at the fourth column of the table included in this document, you need to check the color of the related cell. In case the color is green, it means that that member state is accepting PCN notifications via the ECA Submission Portal. When you submit a dossier, sometimes it happens that the status of the submission remains pending. That means that the system has not processed your dossier yet. That can happen because several dossiers are submitted at the same time, and the system needs some time to process them all. So basically, your dossier is queuing. When you see that the status of your dossier is pending, the first thing to do is not to resubmit, because once the system is able to process your submission, then all the submissions you have done after that, they will fail. So the first thing to do is to refresh the page and update, see if the information in the submission report gets updated. If the pending status remains for longer, then please contact ECHA via the help desk so that we can run further investigation. Sometimes it can happen that dossiers are submitted by mistake, or they are submitted but they contain information that was not meant to be submitted because maybe it's wrong information, maybe wrong UFID have been notified. We have been informed about the cases, for instance, where dossiers that were meant to be test dossiers were actually submitted not in the trial version of the ECHA submission portal, but in the production environment. And therefore, in these cases, test dossiers were dispatched to appointed bodies. Currently, the ECHA submission portal cannot delete the dossiers that have been submitted via the production environment. And so far, the advice we have given to the submitters with this problem was that they needed to inform the relevant appointed bodies and let them know about the wrong submission. We, however, I realized that this can happen quite often. And therefore, in order to support industry in their submission, we have included in the scope of the October 2021 release also a technical solution to indicate that the submitted dossier is annulled. What does it mean? It means that the dossier is not deleted, it does remain in the portal, but it is flagged as annulled. And when it is flagged as such, this information is visible to both the submitter, but also to the appointed bodies. So you will not have to contact the appointed bodies again to inform that you made the wrong submission. The data that you have submitted that were included in this annulled dossier will be treated as they were never submitted. They were never submitted before. And we will be able to share more details about the technical solution closer to the October release. Speaking of releases, in 2021, we will have two releases, one at the end of April and the other one at the end of October. When it comes to the October release, you can expect, as already mentioned, this possibility for you to annul a submission, but also a number of format changes, like the possibility to prepare a group submission or to indicate that you want to seize a product from the market. When it comes to the April release, if you are preparing your dossier in the Euclid Cloud, you will see that fields like other and remarks coming from certain pick lists will be made available as multilingual, which is currently not the case, but this will be improved in the April release. Also, the guided dossier tool will be discontinued. The size of the dossiers that you can submit in the ECHA submission portal will be increased, as well as the quota limit in the cloud services. We will be able to share more updates and details on all the improvements and changes that are coming in the upcoming months and via the LinkedIn community. Let's have a look now more into details about some of the features that you will find in the April release. The guided dossier preparation tool will be discontinued. And that means that when you access Euclid, Now you can find the window where you can import your Euclid files, and then right next to it you find 4 widgets. The widget at the top is the access to the guided dossier preparation tool. From April, you will not see this widget anymore. But don't worry, because all the data that you have prepared using the guided dossier tool will remain in your Euclid instance anyway. You will find data related to your mixtures under the mixture widget, and you will find the data related to the substances under the substance widget. Moreover, also the information that you have included in the dossier header of the guided dossier you have prepared will be still available under the mixtures dataset. When it comes to the size of the submitted files, currently in the ECA submission portal, it is possible to submit files that are smaller than 100 megabytes or that include less than 1,200 Euclid documents. In case more than 1,200 documents are included in the file, then the dossier remains in pending status, and this pending status remains as such, it doesn't get updated. But with the April release, it will be possible to submit files up to 1 gigabyte, and it will also be possible to submit dossiers that contain more than 1,200 Euclid documents. The dossiers that were in pending status because they were containing more than 1,200 documents should see a change in the status. Also, the Euclid Cloud capacity will be increased. Currently, this capacity is 1 gigabyte. And when the user hits this limit, it gets a message inviting the user to clean his instance. However, even though this message is displayed, there are no limitations for the users in terms of functionalities. He can keep using his own Euclid instance as much as he wants. However, as per request by the users, and because the number of users accessing the Euclid Cloud is increasing more and more, we have increased the capacity of the Euclid Cloud from 1 giga to 5 gigabyte, at least for what refers to the standard service. Based on the experience we had in the past months with the system-to-system users, in 2021, we aim to create a system-to-system users community in order to better provide them technical support, communicate technical updates, downtime of the ECA submission portal, to share information of common interest. We would like also to use this community to promote informative sessions, publish some frequently asked questions or sets of question and answers, but also to collect feedback from the users. We would like to use this community to exchange information not only from ECA to the system-to-system users, but also among the system-to-system users themselves. We will be in the position to share more details about the features of this community and the timing of its creation in our next news items and in the LinkedIn group. And this leads me to the conclusion of this presentation, and I thank you for your attention.
So just a few closing remarks from my side. Please check the support material. The answer is probably there. We have version 4 of the guidance now available. We also have translations of this version on way. You might also like to try the PCN practical guide. And of course, we have a number of video tutorials from our e-learning page. So I invite you to go there and have a look as well. And of course, try the auto translate function. Of course, if you've checked the support material and you still don't know, please do ask for help. Remember that the National Help Desk is the first point of contact for all your regulatory advice. But of course, please do contact ECHA for any tool or other support that you need. I'd finally like to mention we do have a strong LinkedIn community which is growing. It's now over 1,700 members. So I invite you to join us, and you can always post there as well. So the take-home messages from today's webinar. Firstly, avoid mistakes and check important information before submitting. Keep your notification up to date at all times. And if you don't understand a validation message, contact us for support. Also, don't ignore warnings in the validation assistant. They are there to help improve quality. And finally, know how the portal works and how to work successfully in it. So thanks for your attention. As I said earlier, the webinar will remain open until 1 o'clock Helsinki time to submit your questions. If your question is not answered by 2 o'clock, please send it via our contact form. Thank you.